Hey, you're listening to the Words on Flick show with me, Janine Coveney. You're listening to the Words on Flick show on Water Radio, KEWR DB.
The views and comments expressed do not reflect the opinions of E-Water Radio. All comments and views are show guest views and comments and in no way reflect views or comments of E-Water Radio, KEWR DB, or its affiliates.
Hey there, Words on Flicks fans and friends. It's your girl, Janine Coveney, with another edition of the podcast. Welcome, welcome. It's the Words on Flick show for November 2023. And for this edition, which I'm calling the Potluck Hodge Podge Thanksgiving show, I don't have a guest. I don't have a topic. Oh my God, I'm flying without a net. I'm just going to hop around to a bunch of different topics as we draw to the end of 2023. And, I thought maybe I'd just review the Words on Flicks podcast itself, review in terms of where we've been and how far we've come. It's been quite a journey. And then maybe we'll touch on some Thanksgiving movies, the recent release of Martin Scorsese's epic film, Killers of the Flower Moon, which had a profound effect on me. And if you've seen it, you know what I mean. And maybe look back at films featuring Indigenous people, and there are a few of those, and some are better than others. The recent actors' strike settlement, woohoo, thank goodness, because they got a lot of what they were asking for, and therefore Hollywood can move on forward. And I'm grateful because I need some new movies. Not that movies really slowed down, well, at least in terms of the availability of things to watch on your streaming channels, on television, in the theater. Well, maybe in the theater it slowed down a bit because I wasn't really tempted into the theater too many times this year, and I'll talk about that. What else is there to talk about? Oh my gosh, this end of the year push by all of the studios for Oscar consideration or any kind of awards consideration for all their documentaries and narrative films and live action films and animated films and their comedies and their dramas, all of this. So yeah, the push to the end of the year means that I'm getting access to, some other movies that I may have missed during the year, which is both nice and overwhelming for me, but it also helps solidify, what the year in film looked like, despite the fact that there was a writer's strike and a really long actors' strike. So I am going to chit-chat here, there, everywhere, and mention whatever comes into my little brain. So I apologize in advance, but I hope that you'll come along with me for the craziness. Why not? This show made me think about just all the shows that I've done with the Words on Flick show. Just to review, I first started doing this podcast, the Words on Flick show, back in 2018. So that's 5 years. Wow. I was encouraged to do this by friends, but also by E-Water Radio founder, Grand Poobah, fearless leader, Ed Waterford. I had guested on someone's podcast, and then another friend of mine, the dearly departed Ornetta Barber, had a podcast on the E-Water Radio system, and she really enjoyed doing it. So when I got talked into, hey, you should talk about your love of films. Why not? A lot of people love talking about movies, particularly classic movies from previous decades. That's my thing. So, talking about movies, movie stars, movie plot lines, and movie production values, it was something I'd always liked doing with a lot of my friends who are mostly entertainment journalists and really picky people. So, and I had actually started posting film reviews in my blog, which is wordsonflicks.blogspot.com. And even though Blogger, I think they're phasing it out, it's a Google platform, you can still read reviews up there. And in fact, I did just belatedly post short reviews of two 2020 films related to jazz, the animated film Soul, which I invite you to rewatch and reconsider if you've got Disney Plus, and the live action romance Sylvie's Love. I also recently posted a reaction to a Henry Fonda Western, a little known Henry Fonda Western that I just watched again, called Welcome to Hard Times. So anyway, that was the blog. And so I just kind of expanded the blog idea to a podcast. So I started doing the show weekly in the evenings. It was like every Thursday night, but that proved to be a bit challenging for me. So after a break, I was talked into starting it back up again. Well, I'm not going to say that, anybody really twisted my arm. It was my own ego, even though the introvert in me is like, why are you putting yourself out there like this? This is painful. But it's not. It's fun. I like it. Especially now that I'm doing it once a month, which is a lot easier to manage. And I am not doing it live any longer. Doing the show live meant that I was like, kind of like the man behind the curtain at Oz, like having to juggle all these things for the production simultaneously while also talking live and stuttering, mumbling, forgetting things, and unable to really manage all the other audio production elements that I wanted to incorporate. So now that I do this as a pre-production, it's fun again. I'm able to edit the audio the way I want to, which includes, cutting out all of my weird vocal habits, like I say like a lot. You would think I was 12 years old, which mentally, I guess I am. Okay, so this way I really enjoy the process of pre-producing, and I love being able to add all those audio snippets like music and sound effects and movie segments that just kind of wake up your ears. I personally am easily bored. It's unfortunate. Like my mind wanders. I could be talking and mentally I'll just check out in the middle of my own sentence, which is bad, Janine. Okay, but with this process, I can record a little here, record a little there, and put these audio elements that kind of break it up a little bit. So I hope you agree with me that you enjoy the audio elements. And sometimes, you can make like little audio jokes and things. But anyway, I digress. This year, I didn't do a full complement of shows, but that's okay. The Words on Flicks show kicked off 2023 with Kevin Harewood, who was my guest. He's a media entrepreneur who's developing independent films and independent projects and talent. And he's always kind of been a mover and shaker and deep thinker behind the scenes. I've known him since his days in the music industry. Well, both our days in the music industry. So it was really nice that he came on and talked about some of the films that he's worked on and what he's working on in the future. Then in February, I came back from a fantastic Soul Train cruise. I really love that cruise because, I'm a music person and a old soul and disco person. So, the cruise was really fantastic, except that when I got back, I got struck down by COVID, which was absolutely no fun at all, especially because I was coughing. I was coughing so bad I could not sleep. I couldn't get any rest, and I certainly couldn't talk. I could barely string two sentences together without having a complete coughing fit. So I could not record the February show. What's interesting is I recovered, this is like a little side note, I recovered from COVID, but I was still coughing for like the next month and a half. And I figured out that the coughing was from GERD. This is probably too much information, but like on the Soul Train cruise, they have a ton of food. So, who am I to resist, right? They have all this rich, delicious food, and you can try. You have steak, you have chicken, you have seafood, you have pasta, you have all these insane desserts. And although I didn't do that much drinking, I did kind of go overboard with the eating. And so there is a thing, like if you have reflux, it inflames your throat and you cough. GERD cough is a thing. So I had to revamp my eating habits, a journey I'm still on. Thank you very much. But the coughing was eradicated as soon as I figured out that the coughing was eradicated. So I was able to go on and record more shows. I came back strong in March with my frequent guest and longtime friend and music journalist Scott Galloway, and fellow media mavens Juliana J. Bolden and Leslie Hunter Gadsden, and fellow podcaster Rome DeVays. And we kind of chopped it up about the ubiquity of the film Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, which was like a big to do at the Oscars. That film was massive in terms of its cultural impact, in terms of it being a mostly Asian cast, in terms of its storytelling and cinematography, and just its overall execution. Not to mention that there were Oscar wins for the lead actress, the lead actor, and supporting actress. So we're a year out from that film being released in theaters, right? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And it seemed that Everything, Everywhere, All at Once really was everywhere all at once. I mean, it was like, it was massive. But it seems to have completely fallen out of the conversation now. We're a year out and just a few months beyond the Oscars, and nobody is talking about that film. We've forgotten it already. So on the one hand, that's really just how pop culture goes, We move on to the next big thing really quickly in entertainment media culture. But the fact that this film has kind of passed from our collective consciousness is also due to so many other big things having happened over the course of the year, both within Hollywood and the world at large, like the political scene nationally, globally is just off the chain, as you know. But Hollywood went through some things this year, y'all. I mean, the film community really went through some tough changes. And I already alluded to it, and I'll come back to it in a minute or two or 5 or 10. Had some other great shows this year. Look, they were all great shows. Like in April, when Noel Hankin came on board to talk about movies from the disco era of the 1970s. If you recall, Noel Hankin is the author of the book After Dark, The Birth of the Disco Dance Party. And that book tells an amazing and true story of Hankin and his devoted group of black male friends who turned their talent for producing house parties, local parties, college parties into a run of managing and operating several renowned New York City discos in the 70s and 80s. And it was so fun talking to him about his perspective on how disco culture was reflected in the movies and how movies influence, what was happening in the clubs, the clothes and the style and the music and all of that. And, I enjoyed the heck out of it because I'm a disco baby and I frequented so many of the clubs that Hankin and his colleagues managed. So that was cool. And for that show, I even got carried away and snuck in a musical disco party at the end. What can I say? Music and movies. Then in May, I had my buddy, who is a phenomenal writer, Michael A. Gonzalez, got to chop it up about heist movies, which was amazing because, who doesn't love a good heist movie? Like something with some suspense. You see a lot of different characters. They're all plotting together to do something illicit, illegal, under the table. Like, we're trying to see how these people are going to outrun the police and outsmart all the security for. Anyway, it was a great show. So then Michael returned in September with journalist Kenji Jasper to document the 50th anniversary of hip hop. So we were discussing the films that were important to the hip hop scene at the time by either documenting the music and the culture or propelling the careers of its stars into the celebrity stratosphere. And then in between there, Scott and I took a side trip to New Orleans for the June show with our good friend, music and retail expert Tony Gaspard, to talk about Crescent City Celluloid, films set in or about New Orleans. And again, New Orleans being another city, American city that I happen to love, and they do too. So we really enjoyed doing that. So just last month, I had a fascinating look at the concept of Afrofuturism, say that 3 times fast, with one of its leading scholars, the author and educator Yatasha El-Womack, who gave us all a new way to look at some of the science fiction films we're already familiar with, and she introduced us to some fare I wasn't as familiar with. So that was a really good show. That was great. So now we're all caught up. And that brings us to November, just a week before Thanksgiving. I don't know about for you, but it's been a strange year for me vis-a-vis the movies. I didn't go to the theater that much. I mean, there were very few films that were released this year that compelled me to head to my local multiplex. But at the same token, there were several things that were released to streaming platforms that, people raved about or talked about or were into. And I just get overwhelmed sometimes. Like there's so many things to watch. There's so much content. And despite the fact that there was a writer's strike and an actor's strike, there's still you go on these platforms and it's all just coming at you. Watch this, watch that, watch this. And I'm just like, I don't know if I can watch anything new. I'm still a proponent of the classic movie, films from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Love them. Even the 80s was a great decade for movies. And maybe that's just that particular viewpoint that, that was like the last great decade for movies, even though there's always great films coming out all the time. It's just a function of me being the age that I am. You get to a certain age and everything was better back in the day, children, I hate being one of those people, but what can I say? I'm a product of my generation. Okay, so what did I go to the theater to see this year? Let me think about this. Okay, earlier this year, I was on a trip to New York. I was helping to promote a book anthology that I'm part of called Women Behind the Mic. The first volume came out and it is compiled by my friend Dr. LaJoyce Hunter Brookshire. She's a naturopathic doctor, and also she was a publicist for Biggie at one time, among other artists, and her business partner Michelle Joyce. And we were at the Apollo Theater in New York City to do a massive workshop with New York City students to promote the book. Anyway, I was in New York and I met up with a friend and we went to the movies to see a little known film, or it failed to make any kind of a splash. It was Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin in this movie called Moving On. I could kind of see why it didn't catch on. It had this sort of uneven serial comic tone, and the story was frankly kind of triggering. And Jane and Lily have done many movies, and the next film that they did together, 80 for Brady, got so much more attention. But in this film, Moving On, Jane Fonda's character was seeking revenge against her newly deceased friend's husband because she claimed it was a drunken rape and he refused to take any responsibility for it. So she was determined to confront him once her friend was gone. But he blames her and tells her that she's delusional. But this one event in her life was so destructive that she ended up leaving a loving marriage to Richard Roundtree, I should mention. He looked pretty damn good in the movie. But she never told him what happened. And, even though they kind of reunited in the film, she still didn't tell him what happened, like why their union broke up or what happened with this other guy. Anyway, Jane's character enlists the help of Lily Tomlin, who's grappling with the fact, she has a secret that her career as a brilliant cellist is over because of arthritis. And she's been forced to lose her home and her living, and she lives in a senior center. Anyway, there's some really funny moments in the film, but there's some really painful moments too. And the film just kind of went under the wire. Maybe it was just too depressing for people. But I saw it, and it made me think, I have to say. I don't think I went back into the theater till May. Went to see the live-action version of The Little Mermaid. I thought it was cute. Did it need to be remade? No. I mean, I saw the animated original, even though I was a full-grown adult when that came out. But okay, I know The Little Mermaid means a lot to little girls. But what was interesting about this one is that it was kind of thrilling and inspiring to see how making the lead protagonist, the Little Mermaid, a person of color, really lit up a whole new generation of little black and brown girls. Like they were mad with the Little Mermaid phenomenon. And so at the screening I went to, there were little girls in mermaid outfits and tutus, and they were all lit up, and it was so cute to see. They were so happy. So okay, all right, Disney, I get it. And plus, Halle Bailey, she just looks like a Disney character. Like, she doesn't need any makeup. She's got those wide set almond eyes and the little pert nose and the big wide smile and the long braids. She's just so cute, so sweet looking. Anyway, I saw that. What else? Oh. I succumbed to the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon. Reluctantly, I might add, except I didn't see the films on the same day. I caught Barbie while I was in London. I was on a trip to London, again, to promote Women Behind the Mic. We promoted it at this outdoor music and culture festival out in, what was the town it was? Well, I'm going to say Salisbury, because that's where we went to, in Salisbury, England. It was called the We Out Here Festival. We Out Here. Anyway, I could do a whole show just about the experience of We Out Here, but I'm talking about movies today. So we went to the theater just to say that, we went to the movies in London, and Barbie was what was playing, and that's what we chose. And, I was like, I'm just seeing it to see it, to pass the time. But you know what? I ended up enjoying the film much more than I thought I would, because, as you already know, it brilliantly operates on two levels. On one level, the surface level, it's a silly adventure story about a bunch of animated dolls, live dolls living in a doll universe, okay? But on the underside, the deeper layer and the epithelial layer, it's like a serious examination of patriarchal culture and what it means to be human and be in a relationship. And if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, you probably don't like the movie. But I was like, wow, this is really something. So kudos, Greta Gerwig. Not that you need my kudos. You got enough on your own. So I sat through Oppenheimer when I got back to the States. And again, pressure, hey, I'm supposed to be a movie critic. I need to go see one of the biggest films of the year. Okay. And this film about the father of the atomic bomb, it's heavy, heavy, heavy. It has, Oscar and awards nominations and wins written all over it, of course. It's a serious cinematic achievement, really, in terms of the research done, the script, the casting, the locations, the momentum. But, this is a movie about a 1940s scientist who helped organize the Los Alamos test site creation and testing of the hydrogen bomb. It's heavy, heavy, heavy. It's a black and white movie with a lot of scientific jargon, political intrigue, quick editing, booming audio, and weird music, and a lot of narrative shorthand. It's a smart film about very smart people from a previous era. They're using their smarts, their considerable brain power to solve a national threat by creating a device that will wreak untold damage and violence. Okay, and it's also long. My life passed before my eyes as I watched it, to be honest with you. Like, am I supposed to be rooting for Oppenheimer? Am I supposed to feel sorry for him? Am I supposed to be cheering on these people? I guess we are supposed to be cheering. We all know the history of what happened when the bomb was dropped on Japan. And depending on your point of view, that's a triumph or a tragedy, or I don't know. Like, I was very, very conflicted about it. And what audience is this film supposed to play to? One part of me thinks I should see it again, and one part of me is like, girl, spare yourself. Like, why sit through this thing? It's super long. And frankly, I consider myself a fairly intelligent person, but I'm no scientist, and parts of it were kind of over my head, so I'll just leave that there. I went to the theaters to see it. More recently, Killers of the Flower Moon. Okay, so let's get into it. I promised that I was going to talk about this. Directed by Martin Scorsese, who's best known for classics like Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Casino, Goodfellas, New York, New York, and The King of Comedy, with actor Robert De Niro, who also stars here, along with Leonardo DiCaprio, who has also done 5 flicks with Scorsese. DiCaprio's done Gangs of New York, The Wolf of Wall Street, The Departed, and The Aviator. So just a side note, I'm much more of a De Niro fan than I am a DiCaprio fan, maybe because Leonardo DiCaprio started acting so young on screen. So I always see him as like this overgrown kid. Although I have to say, this is the first movie I saw him in where he looks significantly aged. Yeah, he looks like he's been through some things, and he has. So lest people think that Killers of the Flower Moon is like this departure thematically for Scorsese in terms of, topic or tone. This is the same man who directed Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Shelter Island, Kundun, The Age of Innocence, which I happen to love, Hugo, and The Last Temptation of Christ. So he's done the domestic dramas. He's directed epics, mysteries, historical dramas, costume dramas, a musical, even a kid's picture, not to mention the documentaries that he's done that I haven't even mentioned. So Killers of the Flower Moon is adapted from a nonfiction account of actual history that has long been buried. I think I saw a headline just recently that said the events of Killers of the Flower Moon, the things that actually happened to the Osage Indians, it's not even taught in schools there. Like they try to squash that history which is an issue across the country now of not wanting to teach Black history because, they don't want to make anybody feel guilty, but which makes no sense to me. Anyway, I'm not even going to go down that road because I'll start yelling. Okay. Killers of the Flower Moon was adapted from a nonfiction book. I did not read the book, so I can't really comment on how accurate the film is or how close to the book it is or the facts within it. I just have to judge the movie on its own merits. So, in case you live under a rock, the film chronicles a series of crimes that took place in 1920s Oklahoma, where the Osage Indians have basically been relegated to living on reservations while the town of white settlers, continues to grow and thrive. And, the Osage, they're eking out a living on this land, but they're also mourning the fact that their culture is disappearing due to assimilation and integration and all of that. And that's something that we can relate to, right? So, but when oil is discovered on the reservation, and thanks to the fact that many of the tribe members held the mineral rights to this land, it made the Osage incredibly wealthy. Members of the tribe can now afford fabulous homes, flashy cars. They're wearing diamonds and pearls and rubies. They're wearing expensive clothes and running successful businesses off the reservation in town. However, times being what they were, many members of the tribe, they can only gain access to their money through court-appointed white guardians. Imagine that. So they have to, go and petition their guardian to get access to their money. Ultimately, many of these white neighbors and white political leaders sought to control, usurp, or gain access to that wealth by any means necessary, including murder. And that's what this film is about. So, Robert De Niro plays William King Hale, a wealthy rancher who portrays himself as a powerful friend and supporter of the Osage. But on the low, he believes that the Osage have no real chance of surviving as a culture or a people, against the onslaught of white settlement and white culture. And he secretly undercuts their survival. When his nephew Ernest Burkhart, who is DiCaprio, returns from World War I, King Hale urges Ernest to settle down, but with an Osage wife. He interviews him, what kind of women do you like? He's feeling him out. Could you marry an Indian woman and be okay with it? Because basically that's what I want you to do. So Ernest kind of likes this young woman played by Lily Gladstone, known as Molly Kyle. And eventually they do get married. And it's, a beautiful moment, a beautiful ceremony that combines both the Osage culture and American culture into one ceremony. And so Ernest, he says he loves his wife and they embark on what looks like a loving marriage, except that Ernest is a puppet in his uncle's underhanded scheme to eradicate all members of Molly's Osage family in order for Ernest to inherit all of their, what they're calling head rights, which is basically their oil rights, their wealth. So Ernest winds up playing both sides of the fence, as a shocking number of his wife Molly's siblings and in-laws are slowly poisoned or shot or blown up or driven crazy or led to what appears to be suicide. Scorsese and the screenwriters did their level best, in my opinion, to portray the Osage people, their language, their manner of dress and beliefs with humanity and dignity and verisimilitude. They researched a lot. However, there's no escaping what actually happened. So I found the film relentlessly depressing and dark in terms of how Indigenous people are treated in this time frame, which is 1920s Oklahoma. And in case anybody has forgotten, this is the same time period, the same state, Oklahoma, where African Americans were burned out and killed in droves during the 1921 Tulsa massacre that eradicated what was known as Black Wall Street. And that incident is still known as the worst instance of racial violence in American history. And they do reference that incident in the film. There's a scene in the local, I started to say multiplex, in the local theater where, they show silent films, and there is a real showing what happened in Tulsa. And the Osage really start to worry that some of this same kind of racial violence can be turned against them. As I wrote on my Facebook page about the film, the sheer weight of these betrayals, skullduggery, and pain inflicted on the Osage by many of the whites, as depicted in this flick, mirrored by my personal knowledge of the horror of Tulsa. I'm telling you, I was almost bent double in the theater with pain and, just disgust. There's little in the film to kind of break up this monotonous march of crime, death, lies, abuse, gaslighting, and just unspeakable evil going on in this film. It's beautifully shot. There's a cast of thousands. They really do their best to depict this town and the time period and the music so well. But in some places, it's really hard to keep all the characters straight, and that might just be a function of the fact that the film is based on actual events and so many people were involved in the story. But also, it's one thing to know your enemy and face them head on. But when the enemy comes to you in the garb of a loving, supportive friend, a patron, a champion, as the character of King Hale does here to the Osage, it's just unspeakable. It's unpardonable. So the film does conclude with the perpetrators being brought to justice for their crimes, but so much damage has already been done and so many lives have been lost among these Indigenous families that, in my mind, there really can be no real restitution. And, I'm just grateful to see that Molly Kyle is able to walk away. So, Robert De Niro, there's no denying he's a great actor. And even though I think it's hilarious for him to try on this sort of Western/Southern accent, he still does really well as the linchpin of all this subterfuge, because of course he's not twirling his mustaches and he's like evil, incarnate, the devil. He actually thinks he's doing the best that he can for the Osage, and it's just their misfortune to be in this situation, and he's just helping along evolution or whatever you want to call it in that part of the country. Leonardo DiCaprio, he just looks addled throughout, and I think he looks addled because his character is, I don't even know that his character is conflicted. Maybe he's supposed to be conflicted, but he just looks like a blank. Anyway, thank goodness for Lily Gladstone, who plays Molly. Like, her performance is like this slow burn light in a grim landscape. Like, her personality is like, she's even tempered. She's fairly smart and witty. She's a devoted Christian and she loves her husband. But it's her love for him that blinds her to the reality of what is going on right in front of her face. Like, you're watching this movie, you want to say, wake up, girl, look around. Like, can't you see what's happening? So, yeah, I had questions, as I'm sure many viewers of this film did. And in the film, you see that the Osage, the tribal elders, they're pretty upset, justifiably, about the integration of their culture with white culture. And yet, so many of them did intermarry. And, I guess love is love. And many of the Osage were assimilated at this point in the 1920s to being devout Christians, where loving thy neighbor is doctrine. you can't stop progress and you can't stop young people if they want to get together, regardless of their separate beliefs and families of origin. And in the film, it seems that the two cultures seem to be harmonious in this community. Like they're living side by side fairly peaceably. And King Hale even speaks the Osage language and seems to have good relationships with many of the people within the tribe. And the groups appear to be amicable on the surface. And so, I'm just like, were the Osage just being lulled into complacency all along? Was this a huge, as insidious as the master plan was to gain these oil rights? Was that just, the latest development in a long simmering plan to push the Osage to the side? I'm sure it was, judging from, the history of our country. Like I said, Ernest Burkhart is played by DiCaprio. He's portrayed as not being the brightest bulb in the package, but he is a husband and a father, right? He purports to love his children and his wife. And it's difficult for me to understand how he can be complicit in decimating his own wife's family and even put his own wife's life in danger when he claims to be in love with her. He's a soldier in his uncle's army, and I guess he hasn't stopped to really think any of this through. But even as a henchman, he's not that bright, because he mucks it up, and that's what basically begins to trip them up and bring them to justice. Killers of the Flower Moon has some great casting. I mean, we've already talked about De Niro and, of course, DiCaprio in his thankless role. But there's also Jesse Plemons, John Lithgow, Brendan Fraser. And I have to mention the great Indigenous Canadian actress Tantoo Cardinal, who has appeared in Dances with Wolves, Smoke Signals, Legends of the Fall, and so much more. But the film clocks in at 3 hours and 26 minutes, and it really could have been much shorter. I think some of those scenes could have been cut. I just think that the filmmakers just wanted to be so careful in handling the story and not offending or slighting members of the Osage tribe or even, the survivors. I don't know. It could have been shorter. But, that's not going to stop the acclaims, the accolades. So definitely look for Killers of the Flower Moon to receive a raft of nominations in the next few months. For sure. For sure. In thinking about Native Americans and how they've been portrayed on screen, Hollywood has long been fascinated with depicting Native Americans. But first, it was as problematic villains who must be killed and put down in numerous westerns. They've been unfairly depicted as savage or prone to violence and excessive behavior in terms of sex, drugs, alcohol, since the earliest days of filmmaking, even up through the 1970s and even the 80s. In a lot of films from the early, the golden age of Hollywood, so-called, it was the taint of quote-unquote Injun blood on a white person, either through close association or miscegenation, that could prove deadly for numerous characters in those early films. It just makes me think about how John Wayne wanted to kill his adopted niece, Natalie Wood, who'd been kidnapped by the Comanche, rather than have her continue to live as a Comanche wife or bring her home to her family in the epic 1956 The Searchers, which was directed by John Ford. Like, he goes out searching for her, searching for other kidnapped women, and finds his niece, and he wants to put a bullet in her. Like, this taint shall not stand, better dead than an Indian, okay, in The Searchers. And this flick is considered a masterpiece of filmmaking and storytelling, and it's true that the cinematography and the sets and just the color is really amazing. The whole Western landscape is beautiful, but look at how Indians are depicted in the film. In one of my favorite 1940s pot boilers that came after Gone with the Wind is Duel in the Sun. in which Jennifer Jones, a white actress, plays Pearl Chavez, a young woman who is half Creole and half Native American. And in the story, she's treated like trash by most of the members of her adopted Texas ranching family for much of the film. And like she's called a half-breed, a squaw. She's seen as being naturally wild, fiery, easy, and called, dark-skinned, as if. But it's only when she's pushed past her limit that she actually reverts to her Indian ways, or so we're told, to seek revenge on the man who ruined her life. And, she really, as a character, she is just kind of doomed from the beginning because it's difficult for her to assimilate into, white culture. People won't let her because they keep reminding her, or, literally painting her with this red brush. Oh, you're a hot-headed Injun. So that's another way that being Native is portrayed, like you're doomed. In the film Tell 'Em Willie Boy Is Here from 1969, Robert Blake plays a Native American of the Paiute tribe in 1909 Southern California. He kills his lover's father in self-defense. Then he goes on the run in the desert with his lover, who's also part Indian, played by Catherine Ross, I should mention, of The Graduate. Along the way, she's killed, whether by Willie or by the girl herself. We don't know if she killed herself or if he killed her. But he also kills a bounty hunter, cementing his portrayal in the film like he's this wild, violent Indian, and all the people in the town are like terrified, like he needs to be captured right away. And though Robert Blake is the title character, the film really centers on Robert Redford's character. He's the sheriff who's been brought in and tasked with hunting down Willie Boy and bringing him to justice. Now, Willie, he has some close calls. He manages to elude them several times, but he ultimately kills himself rather than face the white man's justice, which would include a public execution to satisfy all of these white inhabitants who are basically clamoring for his blood. This is how Native Americans, other than the cowboys and Indians tropes of early Westerns, later they actually become punchlines. They are cigar store Indians, or there's jokes about their language and their customs. What immediately springs to mind is the 1950 MGM musical version of Annie Get Your Gun, in which star Betty Hutton as Annie Oakley. She is indoctrinated into the Sioux tribe of Chief Sitting Bull. He adopts her as his daughter. So she's indoctrinated into the tribe in this big dance production number. Chief Sitting Bull is actually an attraction, a fellow attraction in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show of the 1800s. So in the musical, she sings this tune called I'm an Indian Too. And it's like the tom-toms and the, and the face paint. And one of the lines from the song she sings is,
just like rising moon, falling hands, running nose, like those Indians, I'm an Indian too. I sue, ooh, ooh, I sue, ooh, ooh.
Falling pants, running nose. I mean, I know it's a comedy, but that's, there were a lot of films just lampooning Indian culture and Indians. By the 1970s and 80s, we're seeing more sympathetic depictions of Indigenous life and Indigenous characters, and everyone remembers Dances with Wolves from 1990, which was the Oscar-winning directorial effort by Kevin Costner, who also stars. And it's a movie that if it's on TV, I'm going to watch it because it's just a beautifully shot film. It's got beautiful music. It stars a lot of Native American actors. And it's about a former Union cavalry soldier in the West who befriends and eventually joins a Lakota tribe. And we learn a lot about their lifestyle, and they just call themselves the people, and they live off the land. They do some farming and they do buffalo hunting, and we see a buffalo hunt, and we learn a lot about their customs. And so that is a film where the Indian lifestyle is treated with respect, but still seen through a white man's eyes, a sympathetic set of eyes, but still. And then the novel The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper has been filmed a few times, most recently in a lavish and romantic 1992 production by director Michael Mann, starring Daniel Day-Lewis as Hawkeye, the adopted son of Chingachgook, played by Russell Means, who is the last full-blooded member of his Mohican tribe. So the film is set during the 1700s French and Indian Wars in upstate New York's Adirondack Mountains, and we see numerous struggles play out as the English troops struggle to protect the settlers, who see themselves as nascent Americans, not Englishmen, and the conflict between various tribes, as some align with the English and others, like the Huron, align with the French troops. Now, while the white Hawkeye develops a romance with Cora, played by Madeline Stowe, who's the daughter of the English general, it's implied that the younger daughter, Alice, and Chingachgook's son, Uncas, are also developing feelings for each other, but we don't get to see that romance between a white female and a native male play out because Alice is kidnapped by the Huron, and in one of the film's most heartbreaking scenes, she chooses death rather than be defiled by the tribe. So films from the 1970s tended to portray Indigenous people through the eyes of a white protagonist who discovers or develops a relationship or goes to live, he goes native, in these films. And some of those are interesting in portraying Indigenous life. But what I'm encouraged to see is that in recent years, there have been more Indigenous people making their own films about what it's like to live on the reservation, or about some of their ancestral heroes. There's actually a great list online of films about Native American life at the website for the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Libraries, and you can find it at library.unc.edu. They have an article called 53 Films to Watch During American Indian Heritage Month. In honor of American Indian Heritage Month, which is November, the Media and Design Center at the University Libraries have compiled a list of films by American Indian creators and telling American Indian stories. So if you go on and see this list, it is a list of narrative films and documentaries that celebrate different aspects of historic and contemporary Native American life. And while Dances with Wolves and Smoke Signals on here, there are also a lot of other films that you probably never heard of that go beyond, some of the films that we know, like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee and Wind Talkers, and you should check them out. And then there's been the recent series called Reservation Dogs, about contemporary life on the reservation, that a lot of people have been raving about. So November is Native American Heritage Month. When we celebrate, most Americans celebrate Thanksgiving. So we know it's a fraught holiday for people of Indigenous ancestry. So thankfully, we're moving into the holiday season with the 2 major Hollywood strikes now settled, where everyone can get back to work creating and filming movies. So that's great. And the Writers Guild settled in October, so it's still pretty new. And the writers won concessions across multiple areas that they said were crucial, including residual payments for shows on streaming platforms, more transparency on viewership numbers for streaming platforms such as Netflix, and minimum numbers of writers for pre-development mini rooms and guidelines for the use of artificial intelligence. So that is a good thing. And the movie studios finally came to an agreement after a months-long strike by actors where they couldn't work on new projects or promote the projects they'd already finished. In a nutshell, after an agonizingly long walkout, like 4 months of no work, the longest in the union's history, is a really long time to have no work. So the actors made some great gains. Basically, they got minimum pay increases. They're allowed consent and compensation for the use of their image by artificial intelligence, which was a big sticking point. And they will receive compensation bonuses for streaming. So as we get ready for gathering with friends and family and some heavy turkey meals this week, I'm just going to give you a handful of my Thanksgiving movie recommendations to enjoy. Just a few. All right. Here goes. So some of you will remember this small movie called Pieces of April from 2003, in which Katie Holmes, who lives alone in New York City, attempts to host her family for Thanksgiving for the first time in her tiny apartment, and everything that ensues from that effort. Another movie on my list that I started to include in my blah blah about movies about Indigenous people is Apocalypto. I know it's controversial, but I thought it was a great film. Apocalypto was Mel Gibson's 2006 directorial effort that basically follows a young Mayan who is captured and then escapes being ritually sacrificed to the gods by the powers that be in his culture. Pretty much an adventure thriller. You know, the action and the suspense is nonstop. Great performance by the lead actor. Then you can go back to Soul Food. It's a classic from 1997 about a trio of sisters, their loves, and their efforts to carry on the Sunday dinner tradition that their mother had established, but she's fallen ill. You know, you've got Vanessa Williams, Vivica A. Fox, Nia Long, Michael Beach, Mekhi Phifer, others. This one never gets old. It's perfect for Thanksgiving because, that food, the spread of food, incredible. And I have to add one of my favorite comedies to wrap up, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with Steve Martin and John Candy. That movie still makes me laugh like a hyena. I've seen it multiple times. It never fails to tickle my funny bone. Steve Martin, I think he's an ad executive. He's some sort of executive, and he's gone on a business trip to New York, and he's just trying to get home to Chicago for Thanksgiving dinner. But he encounters John Candy and every possible travel snafu known to man. Highly recommended. Funny as all get out. Now, as I'm getting hit up for movies to watch, to put on my best lists, I actually caught the documentary Invisible Beauty about Beth Ann Hardison, who was a trailblazing Black model in the 1970s, and then she became a model agent and then an activist for the rights of models of color in the fashion industry. And it is a fascinating story. I think the documentary is a little bit too long, but really Beth Ann Hardison is a fascinating figure. I was fortunate enough to meet her when I worked at Billboard, and she was active in the Black Girls Coalition, and she's just a lovely lady. And so I enjoyed that a lot. And I'm looking forward to seeing American Fiction, which is a adaptation of a novel by Percival Everett, who happens to be one of my favorite novelists. It looks like it's going to be an absolute hoot, so I'm looking forward to that. So anyway, Words on Flicks fans and friends, wishing you a fantastic holiday. Be safe. Don't eat too much. Don't drink too much. We still have to get through Christmas. So keep watching. Keep watching out. Peace.